Welcome to Responsible Decision Making, part of social and emotional learning. This is brought to you by Canyon Professional Development, part of Grand Canyon University. And hi, my name is Bosma, and I am a Canyon PD K-12 Professional Development Manager. I have 15 years of experience in education, primarily in science education and in STEM, outdoor education, as well as professional development. Most of those years teaching science to K-8 students. And there's my contact information. Please do feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions. And I like to start with a quote. So for this one, every human has 4 endowments: self-awareness, conscience, independent will, and creative imagination. And this gives us the ultimate human freedom and the power to choose, to respond, and to change. And this is from Stephen R. Covey. And this quote also was part of my last workshop in this series. But it continues to support the idea of moving our students into a place of being not only self-aware, but self-managing. And now we're going to look at making those responsible decisions. That the younger that we can start making the responsible decisions, the easier it will be. So thinking about creating that human freedom in being responsible for oneself. So our norms and expectations now, as I said before, in a short workshop, if I was doing this with a group of people, and in person or online, I like to start with just some common norms and expectations that we can agree on. In your classroom, I really urge you to create norms and expectations with your students. If I was doing a workshop that's all day or several days, I'm going to take the time to create some norms and expectations with the people participating. I want them to have a stake in what those might be so that they work for the people participating. And it gives them buy-in as well. So our objectives today, participants are going to discover how self-awareness leads to responsible decision-making, and sort of connecting the last workshop, if you were there, to the idea of responsible decision-making, which is self-awareness and self-management. And part of self-management is being able to make responsible decisions. So we can see how those all tie together. So we're going to learn how we can guide our students through responsible decision-making. There is a process that we can use, a couple of different techniques, and then think of ways that we can adopt decision-making activities and tying into that goal setting. Because if we have to make decisions, goal setting kind of comes right alongside that, and deciding where do we want to create planned improvements for ourselves, if you will. So jumping right in here, we have our toolbox. Think about the tools that you'll take back to your classroom with you. And you'll reference the, there's a resource sheet along with this video. So reference that. Hopefully those tools, ideas for those tools and materials for those tools are contained right there in your reference sheet. So I want to start with a 4 corners activity. And I know that doing this on the in the virtual is maybe somewhat, it'll be somewhat different, and it might not add up to a 4 corners activity, but think about how this could work with your students. So I invite you to think about how you feel about several statements that I'm going to share. So if you're watching this on the video by yourself, you might consider just jotting down your response. Perhaps you're watching this on a Zoom with a number of different educators in the same session. Maybe you could go to breakout rooms. So that's one way to do it. So if I was to do this in my classroom, I would have 4 choices. Pretty simple. It would be strongly agree, agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. So those are the 4 choices. In the classroom, I would read a statement and I would have my students make their choice about how they feel about the statement and then go to that corner. And I would have the corners labeled as strongly agree, agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. And once in those corners, the students can discuss why they chose what they chose. What is their opinion about the statement? And then having a spokesperson share out why they felt the way they did, why they just agreed, they did not strongly agree, etc. So here is some of those statements that I would encourage you to use with your students. Students should be required to wear uniforms to school. Heated topic, I'm sure. What do you think? What would your students think about that? Cell phones should not be allowed at school. I know here there's probably a big divide between what the educators and the students think about the answer to this question. Maybe that divide's closing. Companies should be allowed to use animals to test new products. Very ethics-based question. The purpose of education is to prepare students for future jobs. Is it? Is it not? What do you think? If laws are unfair, they should be broken. Ooh, that one's a tough one. I wonder what the students would think about that. So once you're finished with the different 4 corners, and it may be something where you only do one of these statements on a particular day and say and return back to this throughout the school year. You certainly don't have to do all 5 statements in one day. But debrief. Was this helpful in gaining a perspective of your students' opinions, of others' opinions? Did the students learn something from their conversation with their fellow students on these different ideas? What was your thought process in making your choice? Who benefits from your choice? Did you make your choice purely based on what you think, or did you consider what others might think? And who is negatively affected by your choice? When we're making these sort of loaded decisions, these ideas need to come into play, right? So this is why, as we help our students gain those proper decision-making tools, an activity like this could be very useful. So what is responsible decision-making? Castle defines responsible decision-making as the ability to make personal choices for things like behavior and social interactions across a variety of settings. And contributing factors in making decisions include considering things like safety, risk, benefits, and consequences. This is a pretty loaded definition, but it gets at the heart of what we want to help our students develop. Take a moment to reflect on what strategies you are using in your classroom currently. Consider how you will use your reflection to prompt students to consider the impact of their own decisions. Who benefited? Who was harmed? Who was hurt? To demonstrate responsible decision-making, students need to learn skills in critical thinking, open-mindedness, sound judgment, reasoning, problem-solving, and identifying solutions. In order to make good choices, they also need to consider not just themselves, but others as well. It is important to be able to understand how your choices affect both yourself and others. Because the decisions we make can be far-reaching, it is important to have wisdom on how to practice intentionality with our decisions. That's what makes responsible decision-making so important. Developing responsible decision-making skills in students and adults is integral to being able to navigate ethical decisions. When students have strong internalized moral identity, then they are connected, they are able to make ethically informed decisions. People with a strong sense of social responsibility will make decisions based on what is best, not just for themselves, but for the greater good. And what mature critical thinking skills and responsible reasoning ability? We are able to evaluate and judge social situations and balance the different domains of social knowledge to distinguish between issues that concern morals and other aspects such as social and cultural conventions, personal values, and safety. So there is just a lot that goes into creating a responsible decision. And we want to build those components and help our students arrive at responsible decision making, hopefully more often than not, right? So what does responsible decision making look like? Social and emotional learning is an intentional and integrated competencies that are taught to build emotional intelligence that improves behavior, well-being, and academics. The beautiful part of SEL is that it is not just for kids. I know that in the last couple of years, you as teachers have been challenged with much of what have been challenged. And with much of what we can cover today, you can hopefully find application not only for your students, but for your own self. I know as I was preparing this, I was like, I should probably create some more intentional goals, which we're going to get to help me get through the work that I need to cover. The decision-making process steps teach children how to identify the problem, gather information, and come up with possible solutions to the problem. When children follow the decision-making steps, they are able to make deliberate and thoughtful decisions. Since we expect kids to make good choices the majority of the time, we need to teach them how to make those good choices using decision-making skills. This will allow them to create decisions. Remember, the last time you went to an ice cream store or a yogurt shop, how hard was it for you to choose your flavor? I know for kids, it's often quite challenging. I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult. And that is why I do love those new self-serve frozen yogurt shops. Then I don't have to make a decision. I just take a little or maybe a lot of every flavor. And when it comes to our students making these types of choices, it can be challenging. Being indecisive about snacks is one thing. However, kids have to make a wide range of decisions on a daily basis. And these decisions include things such as choosing how to behave, what friends to spend time with, or what clothes to wear, among many others. It can get pretty overwhelming if children aren't armed with the right tools to make good decisions. Teaching kids how to make decisions is a valuable life skill for children to have. And as they get older, these kinds of decisions they make become increasingly more complicated and loaded, if you will. For example, some kids have to decide what college they want to go to, if they want to go to college at all, or what career path they want to take. When children learn the decision-making process steps, they make more responsible decisions that prepare them to make those big decisions that are going to impact them now and in the future. So making responsible decisions doesn't come naturally to everyone, and it's a skill that many of us must be taught. Let's take a look at the 3 common ways people make decisions. There's no decision. Children fall into that no decision trap when they let their peers or someone other than a trusted adult make decisions for them. They let others tell them what to do instead of making up their own minds. Many times this happens because children are afraid that they will make the wrong decision, and they doubt themselves, and they look at others to decide for them. Kids who fall into the no decision category need to be reminded that it's okay to make a mistake. Making mistakes provides the opportunity for learning and growth. And then, of course, we have SNAP decisions. And SNAP decisions happen when children make decisions without properly analyzing the situation. They don't consider the consequences of their actions, and they react to what's going on. There are times when SNAP decisions are okay, like, say, choosing between chips and yogurt. That's not a life-altering decision, at least not for most of us. Food allergies aside. Generally speaking, making a choice between two foods doesn't require you to weigh the pros and cons. It's not a decision that you have to think through in depth. However, it's not a good idea to make a SNAP decision about where you want to go to college. There are many variables and options to consider. College is an investment. You want to make sure you make the best choice for you. Kids prone to making SNAP decisions benefit from learning to stop and think before taking action. Responsible decision and responsible decision makers think about the consequences of their actions and how it will affect them and the people in their lives. It's important that children learn to make responsible decisions on their own. Sometimes kids need guidance from trusted adults to make good choices. However, there will come a time when they need to rely on themselves to make those right choices. And this is when the decision-making process steps come in handy. When children follow the decision-making steps, they are able to make deliberate and thoughtful decisions. And since we expect kids to make good choices the majority of the time, we need to teach them the decision-making process. So step one is to identify the problem. In this step, the problem is analyzed. Questions children can ask themselves include, what exactly is the problem? Why should the problem be solved? Is it important? Who does the problem affect? Is there a deadline on how much time I have to solve this problem? And then in step two, we want to gather the relevant information to analyze the situation. Children will figure out what information is needed in order to make their decisions. Some information will be gathered through self-assessment. They'll have to ask themselves, what do I want? What do I need? Where are my values? What have I observed others doing? And then we have step three, which is brainstorming solutions. During this step, children begin listing possible solutions. Initially, they might think that coming up with multiple solutions makes no sense. However, doing this allows them to think about the problems from different angles. Identify consequences. Now children will examine each option in step three and determine if any alternatives would solve the problem identified in step one. As they go through this process, certain options will feel better than others. Next, they will prioritize the different options and list them in order based on the solutions that they believe will best solve the problem. All choices have consequences. Some are good and some are bad. And then in step five, of course, we have to make a choice. Once children thoroughly evaluate those alternatives, they have categorized the consequences, both good and bad, and they're ready to make that choice. The choice may be the solution at the top of their priority list, and that comes from step four, where they've identified the consequences. And then in step six, this is the final step. Children consider the results. It's always important to reflect. That's where we learn, right? They make a determination as to whether or not their decision solved the problem. And if it did not solve the problem, they may be in a situation where they can try again, and they can opt to try one of the other options that they brainstormed in step three. And this is why a written recording can be super useful. If they believe none of these alternatives work, well, then move back to step two and gather more relevant information to help come up with the best solution. Reflection is the key component to learning and growth mindset. So don't shortcut this step. So before we go any further, it is important to take a look at what is going on in our brain when we're thinking about how we're going to build decision-making skills for our students. What's happening? Well, the brain isn't fully developed, especially, I hate to say it, for the males. until they are 25. And it definitely depends on the individual. But that responsible decision-making that happens in the prefrontal cortex over here isn't fully developed until people are about the age of 25. And in the prefrontal cortex, we have executive function and higher order thinking happening. And then in the young brain, the decision-making process is happening over here in the amygdala. And the amygdala is sort of our emotional center. So when we make those decisions as young people, infants to early elementary, there's a very reactionary component to it. It's very emotional. So we can build stronger connections between the different parts of our brain if we intentionally work that muscle and build those synapses, right? So getting our decision-making process over here to the prefrontal cortex, where higher order thinking is involved and logic and reasoning happen, then we are making optimal decisions. So that's just a little snippet, very short snapshot of what's happening in our brain and why do we have to explicitly teach these skills. So we have some different decision-making styles to consider as well. There's that inactive decision, making indecisive and unsure choices. Maybe we don't really want to make a decision, so we try not to. We try to avoid decision making, right? Reactive decision making, following the crowd, doing what you're told, trying to overly please others, and you want to avoid making mistakes. So if I don't make a decision, I can't be a mistake, right? It's okay to make mistakes. And then we also have proactive decision making, and we use the responsible decision making model, and we take responsibility for our decisions, and we review our options. So this is where we want our students to get to, right? They start here, they spend some time here, and some people never leave here because maybe they weren't really taught how to make responsible decisions. Just like reading and writing, this is something that really we have to learn. We have to learn. And whether we're taught formally in a classroom or outside the classroom, it is still something that we have to learn. I know, following that responsible decision-making process, one of the things that's near and dear to me is I love hiking, and I've hiked Camelback Mountain, which is not too far from where I live, many times. But it seems that it's one of those hikes that people oftentimes find themselves in a bad situation because they didn't make responsible decisions. Visitors from out of town don't understand how hot it can get, and maybe they're not avid hikers and don't understand the needs that they need to take care of before they start hiking Camelback, and they often have to be rescued off the mountain. So that's just for me like one of those situations where it definitely was not responsible decision making. We don't hike Camelback in July at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You don't do it, and you certainly don't do that with just one little tiny bottle of water. So being informed and thinking through that decision-making process, I'm sure would help a lot of those folks that have found themselves in a precarious situation. So let's take a look at sort of how this responsible decision-making is going to look in your classroom. Here are 4 areas of focus for your classroom and your school. You want to establish those classroom norms, and we talked about that previously, establish those collectively. And then be sure to define safe and unsafe behavior. Kids don't know. Now they can base their decisions on how they behave based on the guidelines that have been given to them. Academic content. We're going to see how the decision-making process plays out in history. And, we can see how in history the decision-making process was used well and maybe not used at all. It's a great example. In science and math, there's lots of decisions that have to be made and in literature. So we're constantly making decisions as we work through our academic content. Really focus in on how responsible decision making is going to help them be successful in the content. And then looking at consequences. Consequences, oftentimes we hear that word and we think of just negative consequences, but consequences refers to both good and bad outcomes. So there are good outcomes, and those should be focused on just as much, if not twice as much, as the bad outcomes, that we emphasize the consequences for both good and bad choices. And let's get to our decision-making framework. Why do kids make the choices they do? It might be hard to say, but when you ask students why, more than likely, why did you do that? More than likely, whatever that response is, it is partially or completely made up. Choices are often subconscious, and students wind up making up a response to the old question, why? Ask what instead. What decision did you make? This causes reflection to the impulsivity or thoughtlessness of the action. And in order to make an informed decision, we need to identify the situation. And so this is where we can use SOTAs. And SOTAs is an acronym for a simple problem-solving method that is easy for children and youth to learn, understand, and use. It can be effectively taught using role-playing, applying it to situations children and youth see and experience, such as characters, like you could use a short clip from a TV show and walk through what sort of decision-making process happened as the plot unfolds. And when we use SOTAs, it is best understood when a child or teen uses it immediately after being involved in a situation in which they got into trouble or faced an outcome that they were not happy with. Now let's take that, let's turn it around, walk through this decision-making process and see how we could have made a better decision. So what is the process? Well, we are going to first look at the situation. What is the problem situation? And then we want to discover what are the options for dealing with that problem. So what are some of the different possibilities? There's usually more than one option, I should say. And those options are going to have disadvantages and advantages. So for each option, recognize the disadvantages and the advantages for each of those options. Which option seems most likely to lead to a solution? All right, so that is the decision-making process. So now we are going to just take a look at a example of walking through the decision-making process. And this template is in the resources. There's a link to this on the resource page. And I just created an example here that to kind of walk us through how we might use this. So the situation is, I witnessed a student bully my friend. Maybe this was out on the playground. No other teacher was observing, or just didn't see it happening. So what are the choices that I have? My friend was a student was being bullied. What can I do about this? Well, option one is don't do anything, right? If I don't do anything, I don't have to get involved and everything's cool, right? Or, but what are the disadvantages to that? The bullying will probably continue, right? Among other problems with that, not being able to help the other student might be another problem. What is the advantage if I don't do anything? I don't have to get involved. But standing on the sidelines, maybe that's a disadvantage. But for now, that might be the students thinking that if I don't have to get involved, that's a good thing. I could tell my teacher. What's the disadvantage of telling my teacher? Well, what if the bully wants to retaliate? What if the bully finds out and retaliates? That could be a problem. But are there advantages? The teacher might be able to get the bully to stop. Wouldn't that be nice? Could the bully start bullying you regardless of what you do? These are things we have to consider. And the other thing might be to talk to the bully myself. What if I talk to the bully myself? The bully could do something to me. Kind of the same disadvantage as talking to the teacher, right? But it's more immediate. You're talking directly to the bully. The advantage is if you do talk directly to the bully, then you take away that tattletale and you took responsibility. So there's kind of two things going on there, that you're not tattletaling, which is always a good thing to try to avoid, but it's also important to start taking responsibility, right? But that depends on where, the entire bigger picture of the situation, who's involved, what's the prior history, etc. So but when you're walking through this decision-making process, it's okay to talk about those other things given the situation. So for the solution, and as you see here, we have the SOTAs, the situation, the options, the disadvantages, the advantages, and the solution. And so for the sake of this example, the solution is to talk to the bully. And maybe the reason that we should talk to the bully first is that it has two advantages. And then if the bully still continues to bully, you can go back, just like we talked about in the process. We can go back and look at some of our other options and maybe try one of those. So maybe if talking to the bully doesn't work, we can then go back and tell the teacher, right? Your turn. So you're going to use SOTAs. And if I was doing this with my students, I might put them into groups of 4 or 5. And in the resources, there are scenario cards with a bunch of different scenarios. And so we give them the form for SOTAs that they're going to complete, and then a scenario. And then as a collective, the students get to work through that decision-making process. And at the end, you want to debrief the entire group. And when you're doing that, ask them questions. What worked? What didn't work? Is it easier to solve problems alone or in a group? What other thoughts or ideas do you have as a result of doing this exercise? And if you're doing, even if you're doing this collectively using the video, those are some questions that you guys, that you as a group can discuss. So another more simplified method for decision making that you might want to use with younger students, and this is also included in the resources, is a simple T-chart. And this might work better. You might also model this with students and often, and use situations that they can relate to. Building the decision-making synapses is like building a muscle, and we want our students to be able to tap into this when they need it. So on a simple T-chart, we're going to look at the problem. We're going to find out the pros and the cons. A couple of pros, a couple of cons. you know, what are the facts? What are people's opinions about this? What are the strengths and the weaknesses about the decision that's being made? So that can be a simple way, especially if it's following an incident. So you made this decision. Let's take a look. What were the pros and the cons? What's fact? What's opinion? It's really important to differentiate, because some people think opinion is fact, and it's indeed two different things. And then also strengths and weaknesses of making that choice. Sometimes it's okay to have weaknesses in making the choice, because maybe there were reasons why it still had to be made that way. Now we can look at just some connections and teacher reflections in this process. So we have connect, notice, and learn. And so when a teacher, when we as teachers are working with our students, especially on these, this is kind of loaded stuff, right? Think about how you can make those connections with your students. Have those informal conversations and building those relationships. And then notice how your perceptions might be different than your students' perceptions. And also, how are they the same? Finding that common ground is key as well. Because you might be surprised. Things that you thought that your students would go one way, they might go the other, and understanding why they feel the way they do. That's also super important, because that gives you understanding, context. Is it cultural? Is it situational? You know, what's playing into their thinking? And then learn. Students express and respond to emotions in different ways. And this can be influenced by their culture, their personality, their family, their home life. So get to know your students. That's going to help you help them work through the process of responsible decision making, knowing where they're at, what they're coming from, what influences them. So the next thing that I want to talk about, and it kind of ties in well to responsible decision making, is goal setting. We want to, you know, if we're making decisions, do we want to set goals about making better decisions? Perhaps. So we want to look at goal setting as part of this continuum of competencies. It works well with decision making and self-management. It's kind of where the two merge. So we're going to take these two skills and build in goal setting, which is yet again another part of the competencies that we want to teach our students. They are not going to innately come to you and say, I have set some goals and this is what they are. No, we want to teach those to our students. So we want to help children clarify what is important to them and focus on it, and facilitate more effective decision making through better self-awareness and self-management, direction, and focus. And so with goal setting, students can achieve specific and self-regulated behavioral targets. And we want to make sure we're celebrating the growth of their goal setting and decision-making process, right? A SMART goal is just a way to formulate a goal that gives you what you want to accomplish, how you're going to get there, giving it an achievable timeline, like making sure that you can get there, how relevant is it to the student's life, and then also timely, that we have a set date to look at whether or not we have achieved our goal. So I made an example here with a SMART goal. Increase the amount of time I read so that I can read more books to become a better reader and learn more. How will this be measurable? I will use the calendar and track the amount of time I spend reading each day. I will also note what book I am reading, the day I start the book, and when I finish the book. I want to read 2 books this month. So now we have something to measure. Are we going to get through 2 books? And then achievable. I have time to read. I just need to make it important. I can read 2 books in 1 month if I read for about 15 minutes a day. And then is it relevant? Who cares about reading? But I need to read. I spend too much time playing video games. Aha. And this goal is important because reading is one of the best ways to learn new ideas. And then, of course, I'm going to make it timely. I will track my reading for 1 month. I plan to meet this goal by August 31st. Set a specific date. We want to make sure that we have a specific time for meeting that goal. And when you're launching this with your students, you might make this goal really compact. And what are some different ideas, some different things that we could set goals on? Could it be about getting our homework turned in on time? Could it be about, I'm not going to speak out during class? And how are we going to measure that? Could it be, I will, looking at classroom behaviors, playground behaviors, academic behaviors that we can all work on. Maybe it's helping out at home. Maybe you're not doing your chores and you need to start doing your chores. So setting a SMART goal can get our kids to where they are doing the chores and they are achieving and building their self-awareness and self-management, right? And smart decisions, right? So when you go back to class, you want to make sure that you're modeling how to set a SMART goal, how to use those SMART goals, come back to them every day and check in. And then, of course, how to reflect on how well the SMART goals did. When you get to that T, what happened? It's not going to be that you're always successful, that you've completed the SMART goal. It may mean that you have to reframe it and do some more work, right? If I was doing this with a group of educators and even in my class with students, I will have them do what I love to call a gallery walk. And maybe have students create these SMART goals in sort of a group. It feels less threatening, right? And then have them do a gallery walk. And the students can comment on each other's SMART goals, get ideas for themselves, as well as help each other with formulating really helpful, specific SMART goals. And I always like to, with the gallery walk, I encourage my students to start with the sentence starters, I like or I wonder, because we want to keep our comments kind, specific, and helpful. And so using those 2 different sentence stems helps to keep the gallery walk productive for everybody involved. And so giving them a few minutes to post at least a couple of I likes and a couple of I wonders is a great way to share ideas and to stimulate those conversations. We are back to our objectives. Did we discover how self-awareness leads to responsible decision-making? Well, I hope we did. We looked at just how the brain works and what's included in responsible decision-making, and learning how to be aware of what we're thinking in order to come up with what we need to make our responsible decisions. We've looked at that responsible decision-making model. We've walked through it. We've got a few different ideas about how to work on making responsible decisions, and using those goal setting to alongside responsible decision-making activities to help our students grow in both areas. So that's super important. And in our toolbox, I hope you have a couple of things to put in there. We've got sodas, we've got our T-chart, we've got SMART goals. I hope all of those things are packed into your toolbox. You're going to take them back to your class. And some ideas, making sure that we model, right? Model these practices with our students frequently and in an impromptu way, just from our own personal experiences, right? Make them real, keep it realistic for our students. So we are at the end, and we always like to share our why. Why am I in this K-12 outreach and support? And our why is we want to empower, educate, and inspire our community. And you teachers are the cornerstone of our community. And so I hope that the training has helped you to gain some powerful tools that you can use with your students in the classroom to help you fulfill your purpose and serve the students and the community in which you teach. And I thank you for that. And once again, we have our free PD. Please go to our bit.ly. We have a YouTube channel with short teacher tips and longer teacher seminars, great resources to get you thinking about how you can improve your own practice in your classroom. And canyonpd.com is your one-stop shop for all the resources, everything that we can offer you, and our events calendar as well. So please check in on that, because there's all kinds of great things happening here in our department and at Grand Canyon University that we want you to be aware of. Some references.